I think, as I said at the start of the day, the headlines on Monday were that, exactly you said on Sunday, that the haze might be worse this year. And today, though, you've sent us again that same message. You've painted ways in which things could get better. Transparency, more information, international cooperation, and also cooperation between governments with the private sector, as well as the NGOs. We have in our audience exactly the kind of people you were talking about. I see some of the bankers here. I see Indonesian, Malaysian, and Singaporean NGOs here. And I see many people from the private sector. Earlier today, two of the leaders of the companies you talked about also spoke to us, Sunny Verghese from Olam and Harish from Unilever. So we hope that this is an occasion where we could draw you out on some of this thinking. I could start perhaps with the most controversial area, the planned Singapore laws. Minister, you said we should use the long-arm laws carefully, with some restraint. When you were in Indonesia, was it 2 or 3 weeks ago, you spoke about this. How did the Indonesians seem to take to the idea that Singapore would take the step forward using Singapore law? Were they receptive?
Well, I don't want to put words in the mouth of other people. I think everyone is aware that we're contemplating this law. In fact, we've published a draft legislation. There has been good feedback, and you're aware that I'm also considering amending that draft in the light of the feedback that's been received. Most of the feedback that we've received has actually been positive. The suggestions have also been constructive. I don't think very few people are going to come straight out and say, I oppose these laws, because on the surface of it, by definition, these are good things to have, and you should be expressed in law. And as I said just now, the problem in Indonesia is not lack of laws. They have laws. The president himself, based on all his public pronouncements, believes in protecting the forests, believes in sustainable development. Even this moratorium occurred on his watch. I think today is the third anniversary of the moratorium on deforestation or on clearing peatlands. Right? Today, the new so there's no question, at least as far as I'm concerned, about at the top level the belief that this is the right thing to do. Unfortunately, the problem is, despite all the good intentions, all the speeches, and all the laws, we know from bitter experience this is not working out on the ground. So no one came out to me and said, I oppose your law.
It's a good sign. Minister, the second question, and of course we're happy to take questions from you, and some of the pigeonhole will be coming in too. But just to further discussion a bit, the second element you mentioned was about the need for transparency in maps. Singapore has tried to ask for cooperation from Indonesia and Malaysia to put official maps, make them available to the public. There has been some government-to-government exchange, but not of every concession map. Various reasons have been given. In your speech, you've said that, and this is correct, I agree with you 100%, that from different sources, not governmental, but quite reliable maps are available. Do you think that these would be enough for our government or traders or financiers or Unilever to use as a basis for cutting off purchases, etc.?
Well, Simon, you're the lawyer, and the question is, will the evidence stand, reach the evidentiary level demanded by the court? So that's not a question which a politician can answer. Can I take a WRI map and go to court and say, this is enough to convict the company? I think that only a judge in court can answer. But there's another point which you have alluded to. In the court of public opinion, that may be good enough. And that may already have a salutary effect, as we believe Unilever's principal position has had a salutary effect on improving behavior, responsible behavior by companies. I've also noted that several big companies with reputations to protect have also made commitments of their own. And I've also noticed that these companies have usually sought out credible non-government organizations to audit their activities and, in a sense, to certify or to vouch for their integrity. So I think we need a range of evidence, different levels of, I'm not sure what the legal term is, different levels of weight, but all of them can make some difference. And I hope that it will cumulatively make a real difference.
Your point about the court of public opinion is very correct. And you're also correct that unless the draft law is passed, I would say my reading of current law in Singapore would not allow these very reliable but otherwise non-official maps to be used by courts. It would be very difficult for a judge to do so. I've got a couple of questions here, Minister. One of the questions is, the Singapore government, besides being, of course, a regulator, is also a purchaser of various supplies, whether it's the paper you use your ministry to photocopy, or I'm not sure you buy any palm oil or whatever. But the question here is, does Singapore have any plans or policies, like the Netherlands government, to pledge itself to source only, or at least a certain percentage, from sustainable, certified sources?
Well, this is a good point. So I once asked my staff, go to the supermarket and identify the products with palm oil. After a short while, they came back and said, it cannot be done. Virtually everything has palm oil, including, shock of shocks, Swiss chocolates have palm oil, right? Because it is edible vegetable oil. And then I met a planter who told me, look, if I take 1 hectare of land and I plant soya bean, or I take that same hectare and I plant palm oil, my yield in terms of vegetable oil is tenfold, 10 times. So again, the economics of it are so compelling. It's no wonder that literally in 1 decade, you've seen this enormous planting going on. And of course, the other big mistake was made, again, by well-intentioned countries that decided biofuels was a good idea, that biofuels were green and that biofuels should be subsidized, which frankly I think is an economically corny idea, but it led to distorted behavior and even more deforestation, even more carbon dioxide being released from peatland in order to plant palm oil. So I think the point is that you can't avoid palm oil. The fact is, it is a very high-yielding good crop. But what we need to do, as you alluded to, is to take the lead of Unilever, RSPO, and the other companies to say, let's insist on traceability. See, let me give you another example. Timber. Because of DNA analysis, it is possible to take any table or chair and identify exactly where it came from. That ability, I think, has had an important effect on cleaning up the timber industry. I am not aware yet whether we can do DNA analysis on palm oil and identify the plantation. But the point is that if you have clear line of sight and transparency, and then you make sure that everybody, not just governments, but people demand that I want goods sourced from responsible, sustainable plantations, there will be an impact.
I see one hand over there for Gurmit Singh from Malaysia, whose government has not cooperated to give us their maps. And then another hand over there. Not your fault, Gurmit. No, wait. Sorry. So before I let the others, just one more question follow up, because you've mentioned companies several times. And I want to be fair to the companies, the long arm. If we are in a period of transition where it's still not possible to get a full clean line of sight, how would we treat companies that, maybe half the time are good and half the time are not less good? Or maybe 80-20 or whatever, Even Unilever, which I think try their best, at some point maybe they might make, touch wood, or certified wood, they might make a mistake.
Yes.
Well, how do we treat them?
Well, in life, let's look at it as human beings, right? Nobody is completely evil, and nobody is a saint, right? But if you're aware that you're being watched, I think you behave a bit better. Even if you are hypocritical, my favorite quotation from Oscar Wilde is that hypocrisy is the compliment that vice pays to virtue. Think about it. Hypocrisy is the compliment that vice pays to virtue. So even if your company is a bit hypocritical, at least it shows that you know what virtue is and you're pretending to be virtuous. Okay. That's better than someone who celebrates saying, I don't care, I'm just going to burn, I'm going to make the biggest margin, please my shareholders, and forget about the rest.
Okay, so not 100%, no one's an angel. Gurmit, please, is the microphone next to you? Can we have one for number 2, please? Yeah.
Gurmit Singh from Malaysia. Mr. Minister, I'm just curious how your bill will resonate with this ASEAN principle of non-interference and Indonesia's hypersensitivity, which has been quite evident from the day the transboundary haze thing was adopted in Kuala Lumpur. They have not ratified it yet. Isn't that interfering and going beyond the non-interference principles of ASEAN? And linked to that, I actually want to go to the title of this dialogue. We've been talking of world resources, but so far we have only discussed palm oil and timber. We haven't discussed even rubber. I'm just wondering whether we are out of sync with the title of this.
On the last part, can I just tell Gurmit that the dialogue as a whole is meant to be, so we've covered sugarcane, we've covered palm oil and pulp and paper and timber. You're right, we haven't covered rubber. But the minister's session is entitled Sustainability in the Haze. So please allow him to answer your first question, I think, Gurmit. If I could.
It's okay, Gurmit. I think I would view our discussions on palm oil as a worked example. The principles which we use to address this issue would also apply whether it's timber or rubber or in the future rice, wheat, and any other crop. So I don't think we're really being off topic. But I like your first question, which is a pointed question. Are you interfering with other countries? And that's why you'll realize that I've been actually pretty careful about the way I've constructed the arguments. I started off by saying this is a global challenge. This is not just something which is affecting Singapore, and Singapore is trying to do something to other countries. I also then went on to say the greatest impacts are local.
Local Indonesian.
Yeah, people who are living within and adjacent to those areas exposed to unsustainable practice. The third point I made was that there's a need for collaboration. No country can do it alone. In the same way that we are all collective victims, we also need collective responsibility. That is why this bill has not been hatched in secret, and there are no surprises. I've shared it. I've personally handed over copies of the bill to my colleagues. I've explained when they had questions or queries. And we've done it in an open way because I know that ultimately if this is going to have any effect, we need to work together. So it's not, tit for tat or bilateral or unilateral. No, it is pointless doing it that way. Many people think, very simplistically, that Singapore can solve this or I can magically make it happen. And I have to tell them, no, that's not the way this works. And the other point, which is even more important to emphasize today, it's not even just between governments. It's between companies and NGOs. We all have a role.
People.
I think the people are all on the same side, you know. The victims are all on the same side. But there is a responsibility on those of us who run companies or who make laws or who enforce laws to do more. That's what the people are asking us to do.
Thank you. Number 3, please. Yeah.
Hello, Rory Padfield from UTM, University of Technology, Malaysia. In the spirit of the last question, I just wanted to put to you an issue regarding the RSPO, the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil. It's seen as a relative success story in the last few years in terms of the sustainability journey of the industry, of the palm oil industry. It provides a platform for companies to market their sustainable palm oil, and companies like Unilever can then purchase sustainable palm oil. However, in the last year or so, countries are coming up with their own sustainability standards for palm oil, which is undermining ultimately the efforts of the RSPO. As I mentioned, in the spirit of the last question, is it possible that the Singaporean government, knowing how important the RSPO is in moving the sector forward, can put pressure on the respective governments in the ASEAN to try and fully get behind the RSPO as opposed to these respective countries supporting their own versions? Thank you.
Well, I think, again, that would be a nice outcome, but if you actually stop to think through that, it's not so easy. Let me explain. First, who is RSPO? RSPO consists of palm oil suppliers who've gotten together voluntarily, committed themselves to standards, and opened themselves to audit and verification. It's, you could almost say, would it be fair to say it's an NGO? Or a corporate
corporate plus
consortium,
NGOs,
right? I mean, it's not a government, it's not an authority, but it's a system of self or peer-reviewed certification. Now, in theory, therefore, and in that spirit, you can't really stop others from also saying they want to have their own system of peer-reviewed certification. So it is tempting, but it is difficult for governments to pick one or the other. I mean, for instance, when we talk about NGOs here, you have to be fair, even-handed in your engagement and your access to all NGOs. So it's challenging. Now, I'll share another point which was brought up to my attention when I met RSPO last year. And they said, the problem is, even if all our companies strictly abide by our commitments, the problem is there are large markets beyond who are quite happy to buy palm oil at the lowest price, and I don't care how you did it. So there's always going to be this tension in trying to raise standards, and yet you can reach the point where the company will say, I think I don't want to be a member because it puts me at a disadvantage. Which is why I made the point earlier in my speech about the need to actually tilt the playing field in favor of those who are more responsible. Because if you don't lean against that, those who are less responsible will earn more from that margin. I mean, just think about it. To clear 1 hectare of land, I think is about $5 if you pay one person and give him a jerry can of kerosene to burn it. How much more, and I ask to those of you who are in the business, how much more will it cost if you were to go in there with a chainsaw, bring them down, carry the logs out, clear the underbrush, or in fact, to even avoid peatland, which you know once you drain and expose to desiccation and ultimately fire, will release a significant amount of carbon dioxide. You see, the economics are leaning against us, and we have to find ways.
Almost out of time, very out of time, but one question that's occurred, well, in two variations on the pigeonhole needs to be asked, I think. It's about Singapore as a hub, given our trade and finance strength. The two questions relate to whether you think banks based in Singapore should be brought in, financial institutions, sovereign wealth funds can play a role to help sort of encourage a stable business. And if so, to what extent are things like the equator principles, which some banks follow, things that you would encourage?
Okay, and here again is another example where it's the right thing to do. You want banks to be aware of where your investment dollars are flowing. But how far do you want to impose statutory liabilities or laws on? Let me give you a real life example. In June last year, when we were having haze, some netizens decided to say, maybe Temasek has got investments which are causing this. So I quietly asked, by the way, what investments do you have? Then someone said, I think they have invested in Cargill.
Yeah, they came to that.
Right? I think Cargill is somewhere here. Anyone?
Yes.
Want to know?
Was here. He spoke earlier.
Okay, he spoke and left. Well, so Temasek actually sent people down to those plantations, and they dutifully snapped photographs of wonderful blue, clear skies to show me that it was not happening in those plantations, which are far to the south of where the fires were burning. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is not that we should never have laws or that banks should not be mindful of where their money is going. But you see, there's already a salutary effect. That because I know who is investing where and whose dollars have gone, and eyebrows get raised or questions get asked, even if it's behind the haze of a private email, I think people know what to do on the ground and you get better behavior. So I think there's still a lot more that can be done on the ground by NGOs, by sharing, by transparency, without us getting too heavy-handed about it. And I just want to make this point again, you see. It would be counterproductive for Singapore to take an overly legalistic, burdensome regime that makes it, in fact, more difficult for responsible companies like yours to do business here. So we've got to get the balance right.
Mister, I just want to close by saying first, the next panel, after sadly you have to leave us, there'll be two banks and others who've spoken will speak on the Citibank and HSBC. I also just want to add that I congratulate you on the approach. I think it is important for the Singapore government to take a step, as you have over the last few months, to show persistent and consistent attention to this recurring problem, to show really new conviction. But also, I think a lot of us will come away from this session with you knowing that it's a balanced approach, as you said, so that it is cooperative with Malaysia and Indonesia, open to companies to do the best things, even if they're not angels, and to, in a way, work with different NGOs, etc., in a very collaborative way that hopefully will see this problem get resolved. So please join me in thanking the Minister for his time.